The first light of dawn was faint and cold when Ethan Cole's truck rolled silently down the street. He cut the engine 2 houses before his driveway, letting momentum carry him the rest of the way. The world was still blue and half asleep, dew glistening on lawns, birds beginning their morning chatter. He closed the driver's side door with a shoulder press, careful not to let the latch click. It was an old soldier's habit, moving like a shadow when no one expected him. He wasn't supposed to be home this early. His shift had been swapped at the last minute, sending him back at dawn instead of nightfall. Julia wouldn't know. Noah wouldn't know. No one would expect him to step onto the lawn while the neighborhood still slept. The quiet should have been complete, but as Ethan crossed the grass, his boots sinking slightly in the wet blades, he froze. A murmur, low, jagged, slipped from the backyard. A man's voice, sharp and too close to the ground. Then a woman's whisper, hushed and shaky. Ethan's pulse slowed, not quickened. Years in uniform had taught him what to do when something felt wrong. Steady breath, sharp eyes, silence in his steps. He followed the sound, rounding the corner of the house, toward the shed that Julia had recently insisted on padlocking. The sight stopped him cold. Noah was on his knees in the wet dirt, wrists bound tightly behind his back with coarse rope. His cheek pressed into the ground, hair matted with mud. Standing over him, Mason Reed, tall, broad-shouldered, the smug grin of someone who thought he owned the scene, pressed the muzzle of a pistol hard against Noah's temple. And just a few steps away stood Julia. Barefoot, arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, though the morning air was mild. Her eyes were fixed not on her son, not on the rope or the dirt, but on the gun. She looked frozen, but when she opened her mouth, her words cut Ethan like glass. "Do it now," she whispered. The words weren't loud. They weren't desperate. They were clear. Ethan's jaw set, the breath in his chest iron steady. His hand was already inside his hoodie, pulling the pistol he kept locked in the truck console. He stepped into the shadow of the shed, sighted and clean, his arms unmoving. His voice carried across the yard, calm and exact. "Let him go." Mason smirked without looking up, the way a man smirks when he thinks he controls every angle. Well, he muttered, voice thick with satisfaction. Daddy came home early. But then Ethan did something that cracked the air in half. He racked the slide, chambering around. The metallic snap echoed across the silent yard, louder than any scream. Birds fell quiet. Even a morning breeze seemed to pause. Julia flinched. Noah's breath came shallow against the dirt. Mason's smirk twitched, but he pressed the barrel harder into Noah's skin. The standoff was complete. A father in the shadows, weapon steady, a son bound and trembling, a mother who whispered betrayal, and a lover who thought he held the power. No one moved. The dawn light crept across the shed, painting everything pale silver, as if the world itself was waiting to see what Ethan would do next. And in that silence, with the chambered round still ringing in memory, Ethan's mind was already racing, calculating exits, distances, and the plan he'd prepared for weeks. Because deep down he had known this moment was coming. The silence behind the shed stretched so long that even Noah's ragged breathing felt deafening. Ethan kept his arms steady, pistol locked on Mason, every muscle coiled but controlled. He didn't blink, didn't twitch. Years of training had drilled him into stillness under fire. Mason, though, wasn't rattled. His smirk crept back as he tilted his chin toward the wooden fence post a few feet away. Ethan's eyes tracked the angle. There was, barely visible in the dawn light, a tiny lens blinking red. A hidden camera. "See that?" Mason said, voice smug. "Family court will eat this up. Hero dad with a gun. Violent. Dangerous. Unstable." He pressed the barrel harder against Noah's temple, making the boy wince. "You just made our case." Julia's arms tightened across her chest. She didn't look at Noah. She didn't look at Ethan either. Her eyes stayed on that blinking red light, like it was the only thing in the yard that mattered. Ethan caught it, the guilt mixed with fear, but she stayed rooted, silent. Ethan's voice was low, sharp as glass. "Walk away, Mason. Right now. Put it down." Julia cut in quickly, her voice thin and trembling. "Ethan, Please don't make this worse. Ethan's jaw flexed. He kept his sight picture tight, controlled. Worse? Julia, your son is on the ground with a gun to his head. Julia flinched but didn't move. Her bare toes dug into the wet grass. Noah coughed against the dirt, his voice a rasp. Dad! Quiet! Mason snapped, jabbing the gun harder. No talking. The cold imprint of the barrel dented the skin just above Noah's eyebrow. Ethan's chest ached at the sight, but his face gave nothing away. He shifted his eyes back to the blinking camera. Mason wanted a show. He wanted Ethan to explode, to fire, to scream, anything that could be slowed down frame by frame in some courtroom, played on loop until a judge saw not a father saving his son, but a man out of control. Optics. That was the real weapon here. Ethan exhaled slowly. Inside his jacket, he felt the faint vibration of the body cam clipped under his hoodie, recording everything from his angle. A second camera, hidden in the birdhouse just behind Mason, blinked its own green light. Mason thought he owned the lens, but Ethan had set the stage long before this dawn. Still, Noah didn't know. Julia didn't know. They only saw two men with guns, one boy tied up, and a secret being buried under wet morning grass. Walk away, Ethan repeated, his voice like stone. Mason laughed, low and cruel. Or what? You'll shoot me? On camera? Perfect. I don't even need to pull the trigger to win. You'll ruin yourself. Ethan said nothing, eyes locked, heartbeat measured. He could already feel the weight of the choice pressing down. Escalate too soon, and Mason would have the clip he wanted. Wait too long, and Noah could be gone before backup even arrived. Julia finally whispered, almost broken, Ethan, please, just put the gun down. Ethan's gaze cut to her, just for a second. Her arms wrapped tighter, her lips trembling. She looked small, almost fragile, but her silence said everything. She had chosen her place in this moment. Noah trembled, his body tense, his breath short. His eyes darted toward Ethan, desperate but trusting. And Ethan knew right then. If Mason thought the camera made him untouchable, then that was the lever he'd pull first. He steadied his voice, calm and clear. Julia, he said, his words carrying across the damp grass. Are you really going to stand there and let him put a gun to your son's head? Julia blinked, guilt flashing across her face, but she didn't answer. The yard hung heavy, the first rays of sunlight spilling gold across the shed. Mason's smirk deepened. He thought he was winning, but Ethan's eyes never wavered. Behind his calm exterior, a plan was already moving piece by piece into place. The only question was how far Mason was willing to push, and how far Julia was willing to fall. The sun edged higher, spilling pale light over the yard, but the cold weight of the standoff never shifted. Ethan's arms remained locked, pistol aimed, every breath even. Mason looked perfectly at home with the gun pressed to Noah's head, lips curved into a grin that didn't match the gravity of what he was doing. You think this is about your son? Mason finally said, voice almost casual. No, Ethan, this is about you. About proving you don't deserve him or the life you built around him. Ethan's jaw tensed. Say what you mean. Mason chuckled. All right, let's put it plain. You're going to quitclaim the house this week. Sign it over. You'll undergo a fitness evaluation to show everyone what we already know. You're unstable, dangerous. And then you'll give temporary custody of Noah to Julia. You'll get visitation twice a month if you behave. That's it. Noah's chest tightened. He tried to lift his head, but the cold press of the barrel shoved him back down into the dirt. Dad, don't. Quiet. Mason barked, pressing harder. Ethan's voice stayed calm, controlled, but his eyes flicked briefly to Julia. And you're fine with this? Watching him hold a gun to your child's head. Julia flinched. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes darted between Mason, Ethan, and Noah. She looked like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, paralyzed. The kid will be fine, Mason said smoothly, his grin returning. This is all optics, Ethan. That's the game. And you've already lost. One wrong move here, and that little camera gets the shot of a violent man with a gun. A judge will believe it. Neighbors will believe it. Everyone will believe it. Ethan's eyes flicked again to the blinking red light. He kept his expression flat. Inside, the calculations spun faster. Mason thought he owned the angle. He didn't know Ethan had already looped the feed. Didn't know the birdhouse camera across the yard had been recording since the night before. Didn't know the body cam on Ethan's chest was humming quietly, capturing every whisper, every order, every word Julia said. "You don't have to do this," Ethan said, voice steady but with steel underneath. "If it's money you want, there are ways." Mason laughed sharply. "Money? This isn't just money, old man. It's everything. The house, the custody, the clean slate. Julia gets freedom. I get control. And you," Mason tilted his head, smirk widening, "you get to watch everything you care about slip right through your fingers." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "And Noah, he adapts," Mason said without hesitation. "Kids do. Besides, you won't be around enough for him to care." The words landed heavy. Noah's small, muffled sob filled the silence, cutting sharper than any bullet. Julia's arms tightened around herself again, her body trembling, but still she didn't step forward. Ethan steadied his breathing, lowering his pistol just a fraction. Not surrender, but control. He spoke clearly, his voice directed at Mason, but meant for Julia too. "You think a piece of paper and a doctored video make you a father? You think standing there with a gun proves you're in control? No. All it proves is what you really are, a coward who hides behind optics." Mason's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He covered it with a scoff. "You'll see soon enough. This is already decided." From the far side of the street, hidden beyond the fence, Ethan caught the faintest sound, tires rolling softly to a stop. No sirens. Just what he had planned. Detective Nora Hale. Backup was here. But Mason didn't know that. Julia didn't know either. For now, the stage still belonged to Mason, his arrogance growing by the second. Ethan's eyes locked on his son, then flicked to Julia. He spoke again, quieter now, but the words cut through the yard. "This is the moment you choose, Julia. Him or your son. Look at what's in front of you. Look at the dirt on his face. Look at the rope on his wrists. Decide who you are." Julia's lips trembled. She whispered something almost too soft to hear. "I didn't want to go this far." Mason snapped his head toward her, his voice sharp. "Stay focused." The first crack in their united front had appeared. Ethan saw it, seized it, and stayed perfectly still, his finger brushing the trigger, his mind steady. The game Mason thought he controlled had just begun to shift. The crack in Julia's voice lingered like smoke in the cold morning air. Ethan saw Mason stiffen at it, saw his smirk falter for just a breath. That was all he needed. Proof that Mason's control wasn't as airtight as he thought. "You didn't want it to go this far?" Ethan repeated, his voice calm, sharp as glass. "So tell me, Julia, how far was it supposed to go?" Julia's eyes darted from Mason to Ethan. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her arms tightened around herself, shoulders trembling. "Don't answer that," Mason snapped, his tone slicing the air. "He's baiting you." But Ethan didn't look at Mason. His eyes stayed on Julia, unblinking. "Tell me, Julia, when did you decide pointing a gun at your son was just another step in the plan?" Julia shook her head weakly, eyes glistening. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." Mason cut her off. "Enough." His voice rose, harder now, the confidence thinning. He pressed the barrel tighter against Noah's temple. "You're the one with the gun, Ethan. You're the one threatening a man who's just trying to help. That's what this looks like. That's what's on camera." Ethan's eyes flicked to the blinking lens on the fence post. He let a faint smile crease his face. Not out of humor, but control. "You sure about that, Mason?" Mason frowned. "What? That feed you're so proud of," Ethan said slowly, carefully. "The one blinking red?" He tilted his chin toward it. "I pulled a card last night. What's recording now is a loop I set myself. It's not your evidence anymore. It's mine." For the first time, Mason's smirk slipped completely. His brows tightened, just for a second, before he forced the grin back. "You're bluffing." Ethan didn't blink. "Birdhouse behind you's got another lens. My body cam's rolling under this hoodie. And there are 3 mics in the eaves of the house. Every word you've said this morning is already recorded. You're not winning optics, Mason. You're handing me the truth on tape." Julia gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Mason turned his head a fraction, as if he could see the birdhouse camera blinking green behind him. The movement made Noah flinch, the boy's small body trembling harder against the dirt. You think anyone's going to believe you over me? Mason growled, voice lower now. You're unstable. A soldier who can't let go of the war. A man who lives paranoid, setting cameras in his own yard. They'll see that before they see me. They'll see you pressing a gun to a child's head. Ethan shot back. His tone stayed steady, but his voice carried like steel. They'll see Julia telling you to do it now. They'll hear you talking about custody, the house, about framing me. And they'll see me standing here calm, measured, not firing a single shot. Mason's jaw tightened. He looked at Julia, but her eyes were wide, frightened, as if she'd just realized how far they'd both gone. You didn't tell me about the cameras, she whispered, her voice trembling. Mason glared at her. Shut up, Julia. Ethan's gaze flicked briefly toward Noah. His son's eyes, wet and terrified, locked onto his father's. Ethan gave the faintest nod, just enough to say, I'm here. I've got you. The faint crunch of tires reached Ethan's ears. Soft, deliberate. No sirens. Just as planned. Backup was here, slipping into place. Mason didn't notice. Julia didn't either. They were too locked in their own unraveling. Ethan's voice dropped, colder now. So here's what happens next, Mason. You step away. You let him go. And maybe you get to explain this in court instead of cell. Mason's smirk twitched, broken but not gone. He forced out a laugh. You think you've turned this around? You've only made it worse for yourself. You've shown everyone how paranoid you are. You've shown her. He jerked his head toward Julia. You've shown the courts. You'll still lose everything. Ethan's voice cut him off, low and final. The only thing I'm losing today is patience. The yard went still again. Noah's breaths came shallow. Julia's trembling grew worse, and Mason's mask of confidence cracked one line deeper. The truth wasn't all out yet, but the first piece had shifted, and the ground under Mason's feet was no longer steady. Mason's laugh didn't sound as smooth as before. It cracked at the edges, forced. He dug his heel into the damp ground, shifting his weight like a man trying to re-anchor himself. The gun stayed at Noah's head, but even that press felt more desperate than confident. Ethan didn't move. His arms were locked, his weapon steady, but his mind worked with the clarity of a blade. Mason was unraveling, and he intended to pull every thread. You want to talk about paranoia? Ethan said, voice calm. Then let's talk about planning. About staging this whole thing. About the camera you planted to catch me overreacting. About the way Julia whispered your lines back like she rehearsed them. Julia jerked at his words, her hands trembling harder where they hugged her body. I didn't, she began, but Mason snapped his head toward her. Don't, he barked, voice sharp and cutting. Not now. But the damage was done. Ethan saw the way Julia's shoulders shook, the way her eyes filled with tears she hadn't meant to show. She was breaking. You thought this was just about scaring me? Ethan continued, his words cold, relentless. No, this is about control. About the house. About custody. You wanted me on camera pointing a gun so you could tell a judge I'm unstable. You wanted everything without fighting for it honestly. Mason snarled, but there was no denial. His silence confirmed more than words could. Noah's small body shuddered on ground. His voice came out broken, muffled by dirt. Mom, why are you letting him do this? Julia's breath hitched like a knife in her chest. She bent slightly, hands half reaching out, but Mason's glare froze her in place. She swallowed hard and whispered, Noah, it's not what it looks like. The boy shook his head weakly, his cheeks still pressed into the soil. It looks like you don't care. Those words gutted her. Julia's lips parted, but no sound came out. She hugged her arms tighter, her body folding in on itself. Mason leaned down over Noah, a voice low and venomous. You'll adapt, kid. You'll forget this. Once he's out of the picture, you'll get used to a new life. Ethan's voice sliced through before the words could sink too deep. You don't get to talk about a life you're stealing. Mason turned back, his smirk returning but thin, desperate. You're finished, Ethan. Once this is over, Julia and I will walk into court with proof. Proof you can't be trusted with a child. Proof you're violent, paranoid. The judge will believe it. They always do. Ethan tilted his head slightly, almost as if considering. His tone stayed steady. Then why are you nervous? Mason stiffened. You've been holding that gun for 10 minutes, Ethan said, eyes locked on him. But your hands are sweating. Your grip's slipping. You keep glancing at Julia like you don't trust her either. That's not control, Mason. That's panic. Julia flinched again, this time at her own name. Her gaze darted toward Ethan, then away. Mason's jaw clenched, his teeth grinding. You don't get it, Mason spat. This isn't panic. This is power. You can't win against us. You never could. Ethan's stare hardened. No, Mason. This isn't power. It's desperation. And desperate men always make mistakes. For a long moment, the yard was silent again. Only the faint chirp of a morning bird broke the stillness, and even that sounded fragile against the weight of what hung in the air. Then Mason's smirk widened again, brittle but defiant. You'll see. Soon enough, everyone will see. You've already lost. You just don't know it yet. Ethan didn't respond. He just adjusted his stance slightly, enough to make Mason flinch. Inside, though, his mind locked tighter. He had the cameras. He had the recordings. He had backup waiting just beyond the fence. Mason thought the plan was still in his hands. But Ethan knew the truth. Mason's so-called power was nothing more than a mask. And masks always crack. The only question now was how much more would break before the truth finally came out. The smirk on Mason's face didn't hold as firmly as before. Ethan could see the strain in the corners of his mouth, the twitch in his jaw. But the gun stayed hard against Noah's head, and that single fact kept the yard wrapped in ice. Noah whimpered softly, his body tense and trembling. His small fists worked against the rope binding his wrists, the fibers cutting deeper into his skin with every movement. He wasn't trying to escape. He was just trying to feel less helpless. Last chance, Ethan, Mason hissed. His voice wasn't smooth anymore. It carried the edge of someone who knew control was slipping. Put your gun down, or this boy doesn't see another sunrise. Ethan's eyes never wavered from Mason's. His own weapon stayed steady, an extension of his arm, but his voice softened just enough to cut through the tension. You don't decide that, Mason. Not today. Mason barked a sharp laugh, but it sounded hollow. Still pretending you're in charge? Look around. You got no leverage. Julia knows it. I know it. And deep down, you know it too. Julia's arms tightened around herself, her nails digging into her skin. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak, but couldn't. Ethan shifted his attention to her, his eyes locking on hers. Julia, he said slowly, deliberately, this is the moment you decide who you are. Him, or your son. Julia froze. Her lips parted, breath shaky. She whispered, Ethan, don't. Mason snapped, turning his head just enough to glare at her. Don't you dare start wavering now. His voice cracked with anger, sharp and dangerous. But Julia's shoulders shook. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling despite her attempt to blink them back. She looked at Noah, at the dirt on his face, the terror in his eyes, and for the first time her body leaned slightly forward, as though her instinct to reach for him had finally broken through her fear. Mason saw it. His grip tightened on the gun, his body tense, his voice harsh. Stay back. Do you hear me? Julia flinched, torn between fear of Mason and love for her son. She whispered again, more desperate now. This wasn't supposed to happen. Ethan's voice cut in, calm but heavy. It always happens like this, Julia. You give a man like him one step, and he takes 10. You thought you could control it. But now look. His eyes flicked toward Noah. Look at your son. Noah's cheeks glistened with tears, his lips trembling as he whispered, Mom. The single word broke her. Her shoulders collapsed inward as sobs shook her body. Mason snarled, his eyes wild now. Don't listen to him, Julia. This is about survival. About freedom. He's just trying to twist you. But Julia's eyes stayed fixed on Noah. Her tears wouldn't stop. Her body screamed guilt. Ethan steadied his tone, his words sharp and deliberate. Julia, this is the line. If you stay silent now, you're choosing him over your own blood. Is that what you want? Her lips trembled, no words coming out. She looked like someone standing on two sides of a collapsing bridge, paralyzed as it fell away beneath her. Mason snapped, desperate to regain control. He jerked the gun harder against Noah's temple, his voice breaking into a shout. "Enough! Put the gun down, Ethan, or I swear I'll." Ethan cut him off sharply, his voice slicing like a blade. "No, you won't." The words landed heavy, too steady to be dismissed. Mason faltered, his arm shaking slightly. Behind the fence, unseen by anyone but Ethan, a shadow shifted. Detective Nora Hale crouched and waiting. Backup was already in place. All Ethan needed was one more slip, one more crack, and Mason's entire mask would shatter. But in this frozen second, with Noah's life still balanced on the edge of a trigger, Ethan knew Mason was cornered. And cornered men were the most dangerous of all. The air between them was razor thin, each second stretched like a wire ready to snap. Ethan's pistol stayed level, his arms still, but his eyes tracked everything. The twitch in Mason's finger, the tremor in Julia's shoulders, the way Noah's chest rose too fast with shallow breaths. Mason shifted, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Put your gun on the ground. Now, kick it toward me." Ethan didn't move. "Step your foot away from my son's head." Mason's smirk flickered, his patience unraveling. "Or what? Or this ends in a way you didn't plan for." Julia's voice finally broke through, hoarse and pleading. "Mason, stop. Please. This isn't." "Quiet." Mason snapped, his anger lashing at her. He shoved the barrel harder against Noah's temple, making the boy whimper. "I said put down, Ethan. Do it." Ethan exhaled slowly, steady, as if Mason hadn't just screamed at him. His eyes never left the man's face. "You've been rehearsing this, haven't you? Practicing what you'd say, testing your lines, making sure the camera caught the right angles." Mason's jaw tightened. "Shut up." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Like the way you called him, champ. The same way you did in that garage video. You practiced this script, Mason. But you forgot one thing. Scripts don't survive reality." Mason blinked, just for a second. The crack was there. His grip trembled, barely noticeable, but Ethan saw it. "You're not in control anymore," Ethan continued, voice low but firm. "You think that little camera saves you? It doesn't. It just shows the world what you really are." Julia's eyes darted to Mason, wide and wet. Her arms unwrapped from her chest and dropped limply to her sides, as if she'd finally realized the performance was over. "Mason," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Don't you dare." Mason snapped at her, his tone sharp with panic. Noah's voice cracked, barely audible. "Dad." That single word anchored Ethan. His gaze softened just for a breath as he looked at his son, then hardened again on Mason. "You don't get to decide what happens here," Ethan said. "You've already lost. All that's left is whether you walk away in cuffs or in a coffin." The words hung heavy in the air, darker than before but steady. Controlled. Mason barked a laugh, too loud, too forced. Big words for a man. One trigger, pull away from losing everything. "Then pull it," Ethan said, voice like stone. "Do it. Show Julia what you really are. Show the world." For the first time, Mason's smirk faltered entirely. His hand shook just enough that the barrel scraped slightly against Noah's skin. The boy whimpered, and Julia stumbled forward instinctively, a sob breaking from her chest. "Stop," she cried, tears spilling down her face. "This isn't what I wanted." Mason whirled on her, his fury erupting. "You wanted freedom. You wanted him gone. This is how it works." Julia shook her head violently, her whole body trembling. "Not like this. Not with Noah." Ethan seized the moment, his voice cutting through. "She's telling you the truth, Mason. You don't even have her anymore. You're standing here alone." Mason's teeth ground together, his breathing ragged. He looked from Julia's sobbing face to Ethan's calm stare, then down at Noah's terrified eyes. For the first time, doubt spread across his features. And Ethan knew it. He pressed the words deeper. "You think you're holding power, but what you're really holding is a boy who will never forget this moment. Even if you win a house, a court, or a name, he'll remember this gun on his head forever. That's what your victory looks like." Mason's smirk tried to return, but it wavered. His hand shook more visibly now. He glanced again toward the fence camera, as though desperate for reassurance from that blinking red light. Ethan leaned forward just slightly, his aim unshakable. Go on then, Mason. Pull it. In the script. Because the moment you do, everything you've built collapses. The silence was suffocating. Noah trembled, Julia wept, and Mason's finger hovered too close to the trigger. Behind a fence, unseen, Nora Hale shifted again. The officers were ready, and Ethan braced himself. The next second would decide everything. The dawn light stretched longer shadows across the yard, but none darker than the one cast by Mason's trembling hand. The pistol pressed against Noah's temple wavered almost imperceptibly, the steel shifting with each shallow breath Mason took. Ethan's voice cut through the silence, steady as ever. Funny thing, Mason. You keep running the same line, over and over. Put your gun down. Kick it to me. You think the camera loves that script. But the truth. Ethan tilted his head slightly, his eyes unblinking. The camera already knows you're bluffing. Mason's eyes narrowed. You don't know what I've got. Ethan didn't flinch. I know you practiced this. The garage video, the fake rehearsal lines. You wanted it perfect, but real life doesn't stick to rehearsals. He paused, letting the weight of his words hang. Just like you calling him champ. Julia's head snapped toward Mason, confusion cutting through her tears. What does he mean? Mason stiffened. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Ethan pressed. His voice lowered, sharper now. You slipped, Mason. Over and over. Calling him champ the same way you did in that recording. You think nobody noticed? Mason barked a laugh, but it was too harsh, too brittle. You're reaching, trying to rattle me. It won't work. But Ethan saw it, the crack. Mason's shoulders were tighter, his breath shorter. Sweat glistened at his temple despite the cool dawn air. Julia's tears blurred her vision. Mason, tell me he's lying, she whispered, her voice breaking. Tell me this isn't what I think it is. Mason shot her a glare. Shut up, Julia. This isn't about him. It's about getting free of this pathetic life with a man who thinks hiding cameras makes him smart. Ethan's lips curved into the faintest, humorless smile. Free? You're not free. You're chained to the very lie you've been trying to stage. And Julia's finally starting to see it. Julia's knees buckled. She pressed her hands to her mouth, shaking. Mason, Noah whimpered again, the rope cutting deeper into his wrists. His young voice cracked as he whispered, Dad. I'm scared. That sound nearly shattered Ethan, but he held firm. His voice softened just a fraction. I know, son. I've got you. Then his gaze sharpened back at Mason, cold and precise. You're out of lines, Mason. All that's left is the truth. Mason's breathing grew erratic. His eyes darted between Ethan, Julia, and the blinking fence camera. For the first time, he looked cornered, not powerful. You want truth. Mason snapped, his smirk trying to climb back but failing. Fine. The truth is you've already lost. She's on my side. The courts will see the video. And you? You'll be a memory. Ethan's tone stayed razor sharp. The courts will see you pressing a loaded gun to a boy's head. They'll hear Julia whisper, do it now. They'll hear you demanding a house and custody. That's not proof of me being dangerous, Mason. That's proof of conspiracy. Mason's face twitched, the mask slipping further. His voice rose, strained. You think you're so clever? You think anyone will believe you? Ethan's eyes never left his. They'll believe because I don't have to sell a story. I just have to let you keep talking. Behind the fence, Detective Nora Hale crouched lower, signaling silently to the officers beside her. The timing was close. Too close. Julia's sobs grew louder. Her voice trembled, fragile but desperate. Mason, please let Noah go. We can walk away, figure something out. Don't. Mason shouted, his anger erupting again. You don't walk away from this. Not after everything I've risked. His hand trembled violently now. The pistol scraped across Noah's skin. The boy's terrified cry pierced the air. Ethan seized the moment, his voice cutting like a blade. Then say the next line, Mason. The one you practiced. Go on. Tell me how family court loves a calm mother and a dangerous ex. Tell me how you'll be his father now. Mason's face went white. He froze, the words caught in his throat. Julia's eyes widened as the silence pressed down. She looked between them, her lips trembling. Mason, what is he talking about? Ethan's tone turned lethal, his eyes burning. You already know, Julia. You've known deep down for years. You just never wanted to face it. The yard seemed to stop breathing. Mason's mask was seconds from shattering. And Ethan knew the moment of truth was finally closing in. The yard held its breath. Even the birds, loud only moments ago, had gone silent. Mason's hand trembled, the pistol scraping faintly across Noah's temple. Noah flinched at the cold steel, tears streaking lines through the dirt on his face. Julia staggered one step forward, her voice ragged. Mason, what is he talking about? Mason snapped at her without looking. Stay back. His jaw clenched, his teeth grinding as if he could chew the truth back into silence. But Ethan's gaze was locked on him, steady, sharp, unblinking. His arms were firm, weapon aimed, his breathing measured. He knew the moment had come. The rehearsed lines Mason clung to were gone. Only the raw truth remained. Ethan's voice was low, almost quiet, but it cut through like a blade. You won't pull that trigger, Mason. Mason barked a laugh, but it was wild now, hollow. You think so? Ethan's eyes didn't waver. I know so. Because he's yours. The words shattered the yard like glass. Julia gasped, the sound choking in her throat. She staggered backward, her hands flying to her mouth. Her knees nearly buckled. No, she whispered, barely audible. No, that can't. Noah's eyes widened, confusion mixing with terror. He turned his head, just enough to look up at Mason, then at his mother. What does he mean? His voice was trembling, fragile. Mason froze. For the first time, the smirk, the bravado, the carefully built act, all of it slipped away. His face twisted, caught between rage and panic. You're bluffing, he spat, but his voice cracked halfway through. Ethan's tone stayed calm, precise. Am I? Because I pulled a hair from Noah's brush 2 weeks ago. Sent it to a private lab. The results came back yesterday. They're sitting in the glove box of my truck right now, with your name written all over them. Julia's legs gave out, and she sank onto the damp grass. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head violently, as if denial alone could rewrite the past. No, Mason, tell me he's lying. Tell me he's lying. Mason's eyes darted between them, his mask crumbling further with each second. His grip on the gun weakened, his knuckles white, sweat dripping down his temple. She told me it didn't matter, he muttered, almost to himself. Noah's body trembled, confusion breaking into sobs. Mom, Dad, what's happening? What does he mean? His voice cracked on the word Dad, desperate to know who he could trust. Ethan's gaze softened as he met his son's eyes. You're my son, he said firmly, his voice steady but heavy. No matter what some paper says. You hear me? You're mine. Noah's sobs deepened, but he nodded faintly, clinging to that truth. Mason's composure finally cracked, wide open. His face twisted with fury, his voice a broken snarl. You think that changes anything? You think a test makes him yours? You've already lost him. Lost him. Ethan's tone sharpened, steel layered under calm. Look at him. He's terrified of you. That's all he'll ever remember, the gun at his head. You didn't win a son, Mason. You destroyed yourself. Julia buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably now. Oh my God, what have I done? The pistol wavered in Mason's hand, shaking violently. He tried to tighten his grip to find the control he'd once had, but it was gone. His hand jerked, almost dropping the gun completely. Ethan didn't move. His weapon stayed trained, his voice cold and final. This is over. Step away from him. Right now. Mason's eyes burned with fury, but beneath it was fear, raw and consuming. He looked at Julia, at Noah, at Ethan, then at the blinking fence camera. His entire plan, the script he had rehearsed, was unraveling in real time. And in that moment, Ethan knew the mask was gone. The next move would decide everything. Mason's hand shook so violently now that the barrel scraped against Noah's skin, leaving a faint red mark. The boy whimpered, his eyes wide, his small body trembling against the ropes. Julia's sobs filled the air, raw and broken, her hands clawing at her own arms as though she could rip away the guilt crushing her chest. Ethan's weapon never moved. His arms were stone, his eyes locked on Mason. He had lived this moment in his head for weeks, prepared for it, anticipated it. But now, with Noah's life balanced on a trigger, every second weighed a lifetime. "You're bluffing," Mason repeated, his voice rising, cracking. "You don't have proof. No one will believe you." "I don't need them to believe me," Ethan said evenly. "You already do. That's why your hand is shaking." Mason snarled, furious, but the rage didn't hide the panic etched across his face. His breath came faster, ragged, as sweat trickled down his temple. His grip faltered, then tightened again in a desperate attempt to hold control. "Put it down, Ethan," Mason roared. "Put your gun on the ground, or I swear." Ethan's voice cut through, calm and lethal. "No, you won't." The words landed like a hammer. Mason blinked, startled, his finger jerking dangerously close to the trigger. Noah whimpered, his body jerking as though bracing for the worst. And in that instant, Ethan moved. The shot rang out, sharp and explosive in the cold morning air. The sound tore through the yard, echoing against the fence and shed. Mason cried out in shock, his pistol flying from his hand as dirt exploded at his wrist. Ethan hadn't aimed for his chest. He hadn't aimed to kill. He had aimed exactly where he meant to, an inch from Mason's wrist, the blast forcing the weapon free. The gun clattered across the ground, spinning out of reach. Mason stumbled backward, clutching his hand, his face twisted in pain and rage. "Police! Don't move!" Two plainclothes officers surged through the side gate, moving fast and silent like shadows snapping into flesh. Detective Nora Hale was right behind them, her voice sharp, commanding. "Hands where we can see them." Mason turned to run, but he didn't make it 3 steps. One officer swept his legs, sending him sprawling into the wet grass. The other pinned him, cuffs snapping tight around his wrists. Mason thrashed, shouting curses, but his fight was over. Julia collapsed to her knees beside Noah, her hands fumbling uselessly at the rope around his wrists. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry," she sobbed, her tears falling onto his dirt-streaked face. But Noah turned his head away from her, his body stiff. His wide, terrified eyes searched only for Ethan. Ethan holstered his weapon and strode forward, pulling a pocket knife from his jeans. He knelt beside his son, cutting through the coarse rope with swift, practiced motions. The fiber snapped, and Noah's hand sprang free. The boy lunged at him instantly, wrapping his arms around his father's neck with such force it nearly knocked Ethan back. He buried his face into Ethan's shoulder, his sobs breaking into his chest. Ethan's arms closed around him, strong and steady. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice breaking just slightly now that the danger had passed. "You're safe. I've got you." Julia reached out, her hand trembling. "Noah." But Noah shrank closer into Ethan's embrace, refusing to look at her. Mason, pinned and cuffed, spat venom across the grass. "You think this changes anything? He's still mine. He'll always be mine." Ethan turned his head, his eyes burning with fury but his voice calm, cold. "No, he's my son. Always has been, always will be. And the only thing he'll remember about you is this moment, the day you put a gun to his head." Mason thrashed again, but the officers forced him down harder, his face pressed into the dirt. Detective Hale stepped closer, her tone level, professional. "We got everything. Audio, video, witness statements. This is done." Julia sat frozen, her sobs quieting into shallow, broken breaths. Her eyes were hollow, staring at the ground as the weight of everything she had allowed pressed down on her. Ethan didn't spare her a word. His focus was only on Noah, still clutching him tightly, refusing to let go. The battle in the yard was over. But Ethan knew the war wasn't done. There were courts, hearings, consequences waiting in the days to come. For now, though, all that mattered was the boy in his arms, and the truth finally dragged into the light. The yard, moments ago alive with gunfire and shouts, fell into an eerie stillness. Mason lay face down in the damp grass, wrists cuffed behind him, his furious breathing rasping through clenched teeth. One officer kept a knee between his shoulders, the other scanning the scene with sharp eyes. Detective Nora Hale stood tall by the shed, her voice calm as she confirmed the recordings were clean. But Ethan barely registered any of it. His arms were wrapped around Noah, who clung to him so tightly it felt as though he might never let go. The boy's small body shook against his chest, sobs breaking in gasps. Ethan held him firm, steady, his own heart pounding with the echoes of the shot he had fired only minutes ago. Julia sat a few feet away on the deck steps, her blanket sliding from her shoulders. Her face was pale, eyes hollowed by shock. She stared at her son as though she didn't know him anymore, tears streaking her cheeks. Her lips moved, whispering words too soft to carry. Finally, she found her voice. "Ethan, I never wanted this. I thought it would scare you. That's all. I didn't think he'd go this far." Ethan turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing. His tone was quiet, but it carried the weight of iron. "You whispered it yourself. Do it now." Julia flinched, covering her mouth with trembling hands. I was trapped. Mason said he could fix everything. The debts, the threats. I believed him. I thought if we made you look unstable, we'd get out. I didn't know he'd. You didn't know?" Ethan's voice cut sharp, but it never rose. His calm was colder than anger. "Julia, you stood there. You watched him press a gun to your son's head. And you said the words. That's not being trapped. That's choosing." Her sobs deepened. She curled forward, her body folding as though she wanted to disappear into the wet wood of the step. "I was drowning," she choked. "I didn't know what else to do." Noah lifted his head from Ethan's shoulder, his young face streaked with dirt and tears. His voice cracked, but it was clear enough. You let him hurt me, Mom." Julia's sobs turned into a broken wail. She reached a hand toward him, shaking. "Noah, please. I didn't mean—" But Noah recoiled, burying his face back into Ethan's chest. His small fingers gripped Ethan's shirt like an anchor. Ethan smoothed his son's hair, his gaze never leaving Julia. "He doesn't need excuses. He needs safety. And you almost took that from him." Mason spat from the ground, his muffled voice thick with fury. "You think you're some saint? He's still mine. No matter what you say, he's mine." Ethan's eyes darkened. He rose just enough to look down at the man pinned to the dirt. His tone was flat, merciless. "No, you're nothing. You'll be a face he remembers in nightmares. You'll be a name on a file. But you'll never be his father." Mason's curses filled the air, but the officers ignored him, hauling him up roughly and dragging him toward the waiting car at the curb. Detective Hale stepped closer, her gaze softening as she looked at Noah, clinging to his father. "We'll take it from here," she said gently. Then, quieter, to Ethan, "You were smart. You gave him the rope and let him hang himself. Every word is on tape. He won't walk away from this." Ethan nodded faintly. "That's what I needed. Not just to stop him, but to end it properly." Nora's eyes flicked toward Julia, who still sat collapsed on the step. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. As the squad car doors slammed and Mason's shouting grew distant, the silence settled heavy again. Julia lifted her tear-stained face, her voice a fragile whisper. "Ethan, can you ever forgive me?" Ethan's arms tightened around Noah. His answer was immediate, firm. "I don't need forgiveness, Julia, and neither does he. You do." Her face crumpled, and for the first time, she didn't try to speak again. She just wept silently into her hands, knowing forgiveness might never come. Noah lifted his head once more, his voice trembling but brave. "Dad, are we still a family?" Ethan pressed a hand against the back of his son's head, his own chest aching. "We'll build a better version," he said softly. "Me and you. Others can earn their way back, or not." The boy nodded faintly, exhausted but trusting, his head resting against his father again. And for the first time since dawn broke, Ethan let himself breathe. The squad car's engine hummed low as it rolled down the street, carrying Mason's shouts into the distance until they faded into nothing. The yard, once filled with chaos, settled into an uncanny silence. The morning sun stretched higher now, turning dew into steam and painting the grass with gold. Yet the air still felt heavy, as though the shadows of what had happened clung stubbornly to the ground. Ethan stood in the middle of it, Noah still wrapped in his arms. The boy's grip was fierce, refusing to loosen even as his sobs softened into uneven breaths. Ethan rested a steady hand on his son's back, rocking him gently, the way he used to when Noah was a toddler. The boy's weight against him was both heartbreaking and grounding. Julia sat slumped on the deck step, her face buried in her hands. Her sobs had dulled to quiet shudders, but her shoulders still shook under the weight of her choices. She looked smaller somehow, hollowed out by the realization that her silence, her whispers, had nearly cost her everything. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Detective Nora Hale approached Ethan, her expression professional but softened by quiet respect. "We'll need your statement," she said gently, "but not now. Get him inside. He's been through enough." Ethan nodded once, firm but grateful. "Thank you, Nora." She gave a faint smile and turned to the officers finishing their sweep of the yard, leaving Ethan alone with the broken pieces of what had once been his family. He adjusted his hold on Noah and looked toward the house. "Come on, buddy," he murmured softly. "Let's go inside." Noah clung tighter, his voice small but steady. "Don't let go." "Never," Ethan promised, pressing a kiss to his son's hair. "I've got you. Always." He carried the boy inside, stepping through the back door into the kitchen. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt foreign after what had just happened outside. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating the kitchen table where they'd shared hundreds of meals, where laughter had once filled the air. Now it felt like stepping into a memory of what life had been, before secrets, before betrayal. Ethan set Noah gently in a chair, brushing dirt from his face with a napkin. The boy's wrists were raw, the rope having left angry marks in his skin. Ethan's chest tightened at the sight, but he masked it with calm, his voice soothing. "I'll take care of those. Don't worry." Noah nodded, eyes red and swollen, but his trust in his father unshaken. Ethan moved to the stove, pulling a pan from the cupboard. His hands moved automatically, muscle memory guiding him through the familiar motions of making pancakes. It wasn't about food. Neither of them truly wanted to eat. It was about routine, about filling the air with something warm, something normal, to push back the cold edge of the morning. The smell of butter and batter soon drifted through the kitchen. Noah's shoulders eased slightly, his body unclenching for the first time since dawn. He leaned against the table, watching his father work, his small voice breaking the silence. "Dad, are we really going to be okay?" Ethan glanced back, his eyes softening. "We're more than okay, son. We've got each other. That's all we need." The boy swallowed, tears welling again, but this time they weren't only from fear, they were from relief. Ethan plated the pancakes, sliding them onto the table. He sat across from Noah, reaching across to squeeze his hand. "None of this was your fault," he said firmly. "Not a single piece. Don't carry it. That weight's mine, not yours." Noah nodded slowly, his lips trembling. I thought she loved me." Ethan's heart broke at the words, but he answered with truth, not comfort. "She does. But sometimes people lose themselves, and they make choices that hurt the ones they love. That's not on you. That's on her." Noah's eyes flicked toward the window, where the yard still bore the marks of the struggle. "What's going to happen to Mom?" Ethan exhaled, steady. "That's for the courts to decide. But what happens to us, that's in our hands. We'll build something stronger. Just you and me." For the first time that morning, a faint flicker of a smile tugged at Noah's lips. It wasn't full, not yet, but it was a start. They ate in silence, each bite heavy but grounding. Outside, the world moved on. The hum of cars, the call of birds returning to their song, the sun climbing higher as though nothing had happened. But inside, a father and son sat together, reclaiming what mattered most. Ethan watched Noah chew slowly, his small hand still gripping his. And he knew. The scars would take time, the pain would linger, but they would survive it. Because survival wasn't just about standing against danger, it was about rebuilding after it. And in that kitchen, with pancakes steaming between them and sunlight warming their faces, Ethan and Noah began.